A question that has been on my mind for a while now, and one that I'm sure has plagued the Pokemon fandom as a whole for years, is what the hell came first? The Pokeball, Fungus and Amongus, or Voltorb and Electrode? Which one inspired the others? Was it just pure coincidence? That's what I aim to sit down and discuss with you today, so stay tuned because the answer might not actually be what you think it is. It certainly wasn't what I thought it would be when I started researching. Also, if you end up enjoying today's video, please consider going and subscribing to my second channel, Mangalusk, where I've just started a brand new Pokemon Violet Nuzlocke, which I am aiming to upload new episodes for every few days. But with all that said, and without further ado, let's get right into it. It's hero time. So to make it clear, today I'm going to be trying my best to play devil's advocate and propose why each of these sources could potentially or potentially not be the originator of the classic black, white and red pattern found on the modern Pokeball. So, let's start off with Voltorb and Electrode because I think these guys are the weakest candidates. Taking a quick look through their Pokédex entries, we can glean the following information about where their body patterns come from. Usually found in power plants. Easily mistaken for a Pokeball, they have zapped many people. It is said to camouflage itself as a Pokeball. It will self-destruct with very little stimulus. It was discovered when Pokeballs were introduced. It is said there is some connection. During the study of this Pokemon, it was discovered that its components are not found in nature. Voltorb was first sighted at a company that manufactures Pokeballs. The link between that sighting and the fact that this Pokemon looks very similar to a Pokeball remains a mystery. Voltorb is extremely sensitive. It explodes at the slightest of shocks. It is rumoured that it was first created when a Pokeball was exposed to a powerful pulse of energy. One of Electrode's characteristics is its attraction to electricity. It is a problematic Pokemon that congregates mostly at electrical power plants to feed on electricity that has just been generated. It is known to drift on winds if it is bloated to bursting with stored electricity. This information tells us the Voltorb and Electrode are hollow and or light enough that they can be carried on the wind, they are full of nothing but electricity, they eat electricity, and they were first sighted when Pokeballs were invented, have been seen in Pokeball manufacturing factories ever since, and the components that make up these Pokemon are not found in nature, meaning that they are most likely made of man-made alloys instead. Honestly, all of this information leads me to believe that Voltorb and Electrode are actually just Rotoms that found themselves possessing Pokeballs. When we consider that the Kanto region is also extremely technologically advanced compared to other regions, it's really no surprise to think that Rotoms would flock to Kanto from other regions in order to enjoy the abundant electronic devices that they can take over. However, we also have to consider the existence of Hisui in Voltorb and Electrode, which existed roughly 300 years ago. These Pokemon sport a yellow and orange colour scheme, and this is back during a time when Pokeballs were yellow and orange as well. Observing the Pokédex entries for these past regional variants, we can find the following entries. An enigmatic Pokemon that happens to bear a resemblance to a Pokeball. When excited, it discharges the electric current it has stored in its belly, then lets out a great uproarious laugh. The tissue on the surface of its body is curiously similar in composition to an apricorn. When irritated, this Pokemon lets loose an electric current equal to 20 lightning bolts. This raises a few more points, as apricorns are an essential component in the creation of Pokeballs, and clearly the craft was refined by introducing man-made alloys in later years to create the modern Pokeballs instead. This is to say, it would seem that Voltorb and Electrode have existed for as long as Pokeballs have, are made of the same materials as Pokeballs, both when Pokeballs were made of natural and man-made components, and possess the same electrical capabilities. Considering that Rotoms do indeed exist in Hisui, this could still lend to my idea that Voltorb and Electrode are just possessed Pokeballs. I think all of this fairly safely secures the fact that Voltorb and Electrode were not what came first, as their conception seems to be post-Pokeball. In that case, let's now turn our attention to the Pokeball itself, as well as a Pokemon very important to the lore of Pokeballs, Magearna. According to Magearna's Pokédex entries, we can find the following information. This artificial Pokemon, constructed more than 500 years ago, can understand human speech but cannot itself speak. Built roughly 500 years ago by a scientist, the part called the Soul Heart is the actual life form. And then, for the true colour Magearna, this beautiful form reflects Magearna's appearance when first presented to a king's daughter 500 years ago. This gorgeous Magearna looks as it did at the time of its invention. Its luxurious decoration pleased the king's daughter. Interestingly, Magearna is not the only Pokeball-like thing to have existed 500 years ago. In fact, so is the odd keystone used to contain Spiritomb, which we know based on the following Pokédex entries. A Pokemon that was formed by 108 spirits. It is bound to a fissure in an odd keystone. It was bound to a fissure in an odd keystone as punishment for misdeeds 500 years ago. So both the odd keystone used to seal the spirits within Spiritomb and the soul heart used to give a soul to Magearna both existed 500 years ago, and clearly display similar properties. This makes it clear that 500 years ago, Pokeballs did not exist, but other more mysterious items were used to seal spirits in order to, for lack of a better term, create artificial Pokemon. However, Magearna was still painted to display the modern Pokeball colours, despite the first Pokeballs being pure black and not even being built until another 100 years later. So perhaps we should move into Fungus and Amongus in order to try and get more information as to the origin of these colours being in this particular arrangement. Looking at the Pokédex entries for Fungus and Amongus, we can find the following information. It lures people in with its Pokeball pattern, then releases poison spores. Why it resembles a Pokeball is unknown. No one knows what the Pokeball-like pattern on Fungus means or why Fungus has it. There is a theory that the developer of the modern-day Pokeball really liked Fungus, but this has not been confirmed. This Pokemon prefers damp places. It spurts out poison spores to repel approaching enemies. They show off their Pokeball caps to lure prey, but very few Pokemon are fooled by this. Amoonguss generally doesn't move much. It tends to stand still near Pokeballs that have been dropped on the ground. Amoonguss mimics Pokeballs. It is not yet clear whether this mimicry is effective against other Pokemon. From all of this, we can discern that the reason why Fungus and Amoonguss have the Pokeball patterns on their body is to lure in humans and then attack them with poisonous spores. This tactic doesn't work on Pokemon, so it is specifically adapted to work against humans. That's just plain true based on the information provided. One Dex entry states that there is a theory that modern Pokeball colours were chosen by a developer who really liked Fungus, but that still doesn't explain Magearna, who was sporting those same colours 500 years ago. 100/200 years before even the plain black Pokeballs were invented. You might say, oh well perhaps Magearna was also inspired by Fungus and Amongus, so that's why Magearna is the same colours. I have something that very quickly disproves this, however. Magearna is from Alola, an extremely hot tropical region of the world based on real-world Hawaii. Not only does the Pokedex itself state that Fungus prefers to live in damp places, which Hawaii/Alola most certainly is not, but Fungus and Amongus can't even be found in Alola. So the likelihood that the person who painted Magearna was inspired by Fungus and Amongus is next to zero, although not impossible to be fair. But this really lends to the idea that Magearna came first. But then, why do Fungus and Amongus have the same colours? Well, considering how quickly Fungus can repopulate and adapt to their surrounding environment in the real world, it is very likely that Fungus and Amongus originally didn't look like they do now, but instead adapted over the 400-300 year period from the invention of Pokeballs to the modern day, in order to take on an appearance similar to Pokeballs. There are already red and white mushrooms in the real world, so adapting the pattern with those already existing colours would likely be a fairly easy feat. On top of that, humans are an abundant food source and are larger than both Fungus and Amongus, so hunting them would be a very beneficial long-term plan. With humans so fixated on Pokeballs, adapting to pretend to be Pokeballs would be an evolutionary advantage, thus leading to the current appearance of Fungus and Amongus. But then, we have to address the elephant in the room. Brute Bonnet. People will very quickly jump to say, okay, well, Brute Bonnet existed in ancient times, so that means it predates Magearna, right? I have two counterpoints to this. 1. If Brute Bonnet existed in ancient times, how did the scientist who painted Magearna coincidentally paint the exact same colours and patterns at a time likely several thousand or even a million years down the line after Brute Bonnet went extinct? You can say it's just coincidence, but that's extremely unlikely. 2. Brute Bonnet is literally called a paradox Pokemon, and we know for a fact that Professor Sada used regular Pokeballs when sending Pokeballs back in time to catch ancient Pokemon. What likely happened is this. The Pokeballs went back in time, weren't eaten by the Pokemon that existed at the time because, well, why the fuck would they eat metal and plastic? Especially when going near it would get you captured and transported to the future. So Brute Bonnet then evolved in order to look like Pokeballs so that they could disguise as Pokeballs and avoid predation, as they would look just like the thing that every other Pokemon at the time would have been wary of. With all of this info laid out, let me now do my best to propose a proper timeline of events for my theory here. 1. 500 years ago, the odd keystone was used as a Pokeball precursor. 2. Roughly 500 years ago, sometime after the odd keystone found common usage, a scientist came along and refined the technology into the spherical soul heart that gave life to Magearna, with the original Pokeball colours. 3. 400/300 years ago, Pokeballs were first invented, inspired by the soul heart that gave life to Magearna, explaining why both are spherical in shape. Roughly 300-400 years ago, sometime after the initial invention of Pokeballs, Pokeballs began to be painted, and the yellow-orange coloration originated from a Magearna whose paint had begun to dull in hue and fade, resulting in this off-colour scheme. 5. Sometime after that, Hisuian Voltorbs and Electrodes came to be. 6. Sometime after the first Hisuian Voltorbs and Electrodes, a Magearna whose colours had not yet faded was seen, and so Pokeballs were corrected to have the proper red and white colour scheme. The technology used to create this Magearna was incorporated, resulting in the modern alloy-based Pokeballs. 7. Modern Voltorbs and Electrodes began to appear. 8. Fungus and Amongus spent the next 300 odd years adapting in order to look like Pokeballs in order to lure in the abundant human food source. 9. In the modern day, Professor Sada used modern Pokeballs inspired by Magearna and sent them back in time to catch Pokemon. 10. Brute Bonnets adapted to the unique patterns of the Pokeballs as a defense mechanism, resulting in the creation of a Paradox Pokemon. And there you have it, a proper speculative timeline of events. But with all that said, that's about all I have to say with this video. Please feel free to leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below, but without further ado, let's move into our usual post-video rituals. So first of all, big shout out to our channel's Thunderbeasts. Riverjoy, Hearn_, Minal Muir, Victor Matusik, Charscream AA, and Plasma6. If you want to help support the channel, please consider becoming a channel member or donating to my PayPal, links in the description. Now let's move into last video's poll, where I asked you guys which one of Ben Tennyson's ape-like aliens was your favourite. With 4,420 votes, Heroes United Shock Squatch earned 14% of the total votes, Omniverse Shock Squatch came out on top overall with a whopping 50% of the total votes, Ultimate Spider Monkey didn't win, but his second place spot with 22% of the total votes still isn't much of a surprise, and Blux was tied last with Heroes United Shock Squatch with another 14% of the total votes. Personally, my favourite is actually probably Heroes United Shock Squatch. It's a very unique design that feels both familiar and alien at the same time, having just enough features that you know what it's inspired by, but also just being different enough that it doesn't feel like something from our own planet, which I think is a really hard balance to actually strike. Plus, any alien that isn't just your stereotypical buff Chad is an alien that I can enjoy. Now let's give a shout out to everyone who correctly guessed that my favourite was Heroes United Shock Squatch. So, big shout out to Double XEE, Gyro Ball Man, Ranger G128, Luke769 Animations, and some random kid. Congratulations for guessing correctly, guys. And with that, let's finish things off by moving into this video's poll. So this time, let's throw out a Pokemon question. Who was your favourite member of Team Rocket? Jesse, James, Meowth, or Wobbuffet? Leave a comment below or on the poll guessing which one is my favourite for a chance to get a shout out next video, and with that, I'll be seeing you all next time. Adios, fellow heroes.